The public is conditioned to watch the skies for ballistic launches. This is a strategic misdirection. The mathematical certainty of mutually assured destruction has made the nuclear-tipped missile a tertiary lever, not a primary one. The real launch-on-warning protocol targets the central nervous system of a globalized power. The first vector of attack is silence, not the absence of sound, but the systemic severance of data. While you watch for kinetic threats, the true vulnerability lies on the seabed and in low Earth orbit. The goal is not to destroy a city, but to isolate it from the global financial system. CSIS reports confirm the strategic blueprint: achieve satellite blinding and sever subsea data cables simultaneously. This triggers a cascading solvency crisis. A war in the Gulf would shock oil and inflation. A data blackout would trigger total economic collapse. The West, as warned by financial sector CEOs, faces a systemic social collapse when its fragile, just-in-time economy is unplugged. This protocol creates a specific condition: the blind Leviathan. A nation-state with immense conventional firepower, but its command and control is severed. Its F-35s are grounded without targeting data. Its carrier groups are liability traps without satellite links. Its alliances, like the Japan-US Pact, collapse when communication and economic assurance fails. The military becomes an inert, impossibly expensive asset you cannot liquidate or deploy. A kinetic war is not a political event. It is a line of credit. When that credit is exhausted, the operation is no longer solvent. The state faces a choice: strategic failure or a pivot to a new form of conflict. This is not desperation. This is a solvency crisis, and it is the primary motive for asymmetric escalation. Consider the Russian Federation. CSIS analysis frames their protracted kinetic campaign not as a show of strength, but as an accelerating domestic liability. An unpopular war drains both political capital and economic reserves. When the cost of deploying, supplying, and losing conventional assets, tanks, aircraft, personnel, exceeds the state's ability to pay, the balance sheet dictates a change in strategy. The war becomes mathematically unsustainable in its current form. This weakness forces the pivot. The objective shifts from capturing territory to inflicting systemic economic pain on the adversary at a fraction of the kinetic cost. The strategic calculus becomes clear. Why lose a billion-dollar warship in a symmetric naval battle when you can achieve greater strategic effect by disabling your enemy's power grid? This is not theoretical. Latvia's Security and Counterintelligence Service, SAB, has issued explicit warnings of Russian cyber threats targeting the industrial control systems of European and Western critical infrastructure. This is the solvency pivot in action, a low-cost, high-impact vector designed to trigger cascading failures far from any battlefield. The West's interconnected economy is the primary target. Its complexity is its vulnerability. Analysts note how even the threat of a regional conflict, such as a war in the Gulf, immediately shocks global markets, hitting stocks, oil, and inflation. An asymmetric actor doesn't need to win a war. It only needs to create the economic conditions of one, exploiting the West's own warnings of potential social collapse. By forcing adversaries into honoring expensive treaty obligations, such as the potential collapse of the Japan-US alliance over a Taiwan crisis, the asymmetric power weaponizes their opponent's own strategic commitments, turning them into economic burdens. The motive is irrefutable. When a state is too weak for symmetric war, it forces its enemy into a zero-sum conflict where the board is not a battlefield, but the global financial system. The central calculation of 21st century conflict is not force projection. It is economic attrition. The math doesn't lie. A recent analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, quantifies this new reality. A modern main battle tank is a $5 million liability. The first-person view drone that achieves a mobility kill on that asset costs $500. This represents a 10-to-1 cost asymmetry. It is an inversion of the entire financial model of conventional warfare. This vector is what strategists term the democratization of violence. The systemic capability to neutralize high-value state assets is no longer the exclusive domain of peer-state militaries with trillion-dollar budgets. It has been distributed to non-state actors and second-tier powers, creating a battlefield saturated with low-cost, high-lethality threats. Every expensive, centralized platform becomes a strategic and economic liability, vulnerable to attrition by 1,000 cuts. This protocol is designed to engineer a solvency crisis in a superior power, liquidating their military assets at a rate their fragile economy cannot sustain. The battlefield is no longer a geographical location. It is a systemic liability. Asymmetric escalation does not begin with an invasion. It begins with the calculated exploitation of the gray zone, any domain where a kinetic response is either impossible or strategically self-defeating. The primary targets are not armies. They are the networks that guarantee economic solvency and social order. The evidence for this protocol is documented. Latvia's SAB has issued direct warnings of Russian cyber threats targeting European and Western industrial control systems. According to analysts, this is not random hacking. It is the pre-positioning of digital charges on critical infrastructure. It creates a launch-on-warning dilemma for non-kinetic attacks, where the cost of inaction is systemic failure. These digital gray zones are synchronized with physical economic choke points. A manufactured conflict in the Persian Gulf, as outlined by strategic analyses, serves as an economic accelerant. The kinetic engagement is secondary. The primary effect, per the Sunday Guardian, is the engineered detonation of global oil prices, equity markets, and inflation, a direct assault on Western liquidity. The protocol's endgame leverages alliance fragility. The Taiwan Strait is the ultimate gray zone liability. Japan's Prime Minister has stated on record that the Japan-US alliance would collapse if ignored. This creates a mathematical certainty of loss. Kinetic intervention incurs unsustainable costs, while inaction triggers a systemic alliance. Cascade failure, isolating the primary power. Emerging regional instability, such as official warnings of internal threats in Western-aligned nations, must be analyzed as proxy laboratories. These are not the cause of systemic weakness. They are symptoms being actively exploited. These zones are staging grounds for testing response protocols, measuring economic pain tolerance, and refining the tactics required to trigger the mass social collapse that financial insiders now publicly fear. The launch-on-warning protocol is a Cold War relic, a systemic tripwire. It dictates that if early warning systems detect an incoming nuclear strike, a retaliatory launch is initiated before the first enemy warhead detonates. The logic is simple. Prevent the destruction of your own arsenal on the ground. It is a mathematical protocol, not a negotiation. This protocol has a critical point of failure: the integrity of the data feed. A new vector of asymmetric attack targets this specific vulnerability. Intelligence agencies, such as Latvia's SAB, now explicitly warn of cyber threats from state actors targeting Western critical infrastructure and industrial control systems. This isn't theoretical. It is a documented blueprint for systemic disruption. This creates the fog of digital war. A successful cyber attack does not need to show a false launch. It only needs to blind the system. When a commander's radar and satellite feeds go black, the launch-on-warning protocol presents a zero-sum choice. Is it a system malfunction, or the opening phase of a decapitation strike. Waiting for confirmation could mean total annihilation. The protocol's rigidity forces the commander to assume the worst-case scenario. This is the ultimate asymmetric leverage. Forcing the kinetic decision is the goal. As assessed by analysts at CSIS, the cost of a sophisticated cyber operation is orders of magnitude less than a conventional military campaign. For an adversary, it is a low-cost method to force a conventionally superior but economically fragile power into an impossible dilemma, where the final strategic lever becomes nuclear solvency. The final phase of the protocol requires a calibration shot, not against a carrier group, but against the systemic solvency of the target nation. The objective is to quantify the delay between a kinetic effect event and a full-blown liquidity crisis. The blueprint for this is public record. Latvia's SAB has issued explicit warnings of Russian ICS cyber threats targeting Western critical infrastructure. An attribution impossible event will be used to test the tripwires. An attack on a financial hub is too crude. A strike on an energy pipeline is too predictable. The vector will be logistical. A targeted ICS failure will paralyze a primary container port, think Los Angeles or Rotterdam, for 72 hours. The goal is not to sink ships, but to freeze the velocity of money itself, triggering a cascade failure that will be misdiagnosed by legacy media as a glitch. Expect this event within the next 10 months. It will be timed to test the would collapse threshold of the Japan-US alliance and measure the exact economic cost needed to trigger a political crisis, as outlined in analyses of Gulf War scenarios. This is not the war. It is the mathematical certainty of the opening shot, engineered to measure the fragility of a system that believes its own currency is a weapon when it has become the primary liability.